As a ceasefire holds in Gaza but struggles to reach the second phase, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu heads to the United States to meet U.S. President Donald Trump. The visit comes amid unresolved questions over the next phase of the ceasefire and Gaza's political future, while the occupation army maintains its control on the ground. The talks are expected to focus on implementing the next stage of the Gaza ceasefire, preventing wider regional escalation and addressing tensions involving Lebanon and Iran. Netanyahu is seeking political backing and strategic coordination. Trump, according to U.S. and Israeli reporting, is looking to manage the ceasefire and avoid a broader regional conflict. So will this visit advance the ceasefire towards a lasting agreement or entrench Israel's control? And can Washington translate diplomacy into restraint? And how will the visit affect the region? I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Welcome to In Depth. According to the Washington Post, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to meet U.S. President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago is expected to test a relationship increasingly strained by sharp policy differences across Gaza and wider regional files. While Netanyahu has long portrayed Trump as Israel's strongest ally, the paper reports that his hawkish approach is now colliding with Trump's effort to present himself as a peacemaker. Netanyahu is seeking tougher U.S. backing on Gaza, including conditioning further Israeli withdrawal under the second phase of Trump's 20-point plan on Hamas disarmament. He is also pressing for support for potential strikes on Iran's missile program, despite Trump having ordered an end to the recent Israel-Iran confrontation and reopening diplomatic channels with Tehran. Tensions also extend to Lebanon and Syria, where the occupation army's actions have complicated U.S. efforts to stabilize ceasefires and political tensions. Gaza remains the most contentious issue, as implementation of Trump's plan has stalled and Israeli actions have drawn U.S. warnings. The Post notes that Netanyahu's domestic political pressures ahead of elections further complicate expectations for the visit's outcome. According to the Times of Israel, Netanyahu's upcoming meeting with Trump is portrayed as a decisive moment, with Netanyahu seeking to convince Washington that only the credible threat of renewed war can secure long-term stability. The outlet reports that while both leaders agree that Gaza must be demilitarized and Iran prevented from rebuilding its capabilities, deep gaps remain over how to achieve those goals amid a fragile ceasefire. The first phase of Trump's Gaza plan has reached its end point, bringing increased aid flows and the return of detainees. But implementation required heavy U.S. oversight and was reportedly and repeatedly strained. Israel argues that Hamas has no intention of disarmament and that international stabilization proposals would not deter it. Netanyahu is therefore pressing Trump to set a deadline for Hamas's disarmament, backed by the threat of renewed occupation army operations. The Times of Israel also notes that parallel pressure points involving Hezbollah and Iran, alongside Netanyahu's domestic political challenges and reported fatigue within Trump's inner circle. The visit is framed as a test of whether coercion or diplomacy will define the next phase.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu travels to the United States for talks with the U.S. President Donald Trump in Florida. The visit comes as Gaza remains under the Israeli occupation's relentless military assault, despite the ceasefire, amid mounting obstacles to transitioning into the second phase of the deal. According to U.S. and Israeli media, the discussions focus on Gaza's future, Iran, Syria, and tensions along the Lebanese border. Netanyahu is seeking American support for Israel's military posture and political plans, despite growing international criticism. Israeli outlets report that Netanyahu aims to convince Trump that military pressure, not compromise, is the only path to stability. This doctrine has already devastated Gaza, leaving widespread destruction and a deepening humanitarian crisis. Washington, meanwhile, appears focused on preventing regional escalation. Lebanon and Hezbollah are central concerns, as the occupation army continues cross-border operations and threats over wider confrontation. Netanyahu also arrives under intense domestic pressure, with Israeli media describing the visit as a bit of international legitimacy and political survival before the upcoming elections. As Netanyahu meets Trump at the president's Mar-a-Lago resort, the visit will test the balance between Netanyahu's hawkishness and Trump's stated interest in ending wars. The visit may reset coordination between the two leaders, but whether it will offer an end to the occupation or a political solution for Gaza remains to be seen.
For more analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Dr. Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist, and from Washington by Mr. Fadi Hellani, Senior Fellow at the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations. Welcome, gentlemen, to Q News. I'll start with you, Dr. Osman. Now, tensions are high on the Iranian front and also the delayed Gaza deal second phase. So what do you think Netanyahu wants to achieve from this visit?
Thank you for having me, Hannah. Greetings to you, to your dear audience, your honorable guest, and Happy New Year and Merry Christmas, of course, to you and to the dear audience. It seems that Netanyahu is flying to the United States to meet up with Trump in Florida in order with a very heavy agenda at his disposal. The man seeks to basically deconstruct the entire efforts or the entire calm that has been reached in the region over the past few months. He wants to reignite the war against Iran, even reopen the front against Lebanon, and even possibly delay the implementation of the second phase of the Gaza deal, to make that conditional to the full and immediate disarmament of Hamas, which is something, of course, that he knows very well is unattainable, which automatically means the reactivation of the Gaza front as well. And of course, his main focus right now is on Iran. It seems he has intelligence, what he considers to be valid intelligence at his disposal, that indicates that Iran is rebuilding its missile program, that it is replenishing its stockpiles of missiles and launchers as well, and also rebuilding its enrichment facilities. All of that, of course, so that it can be a pretext or justification for carrying out another war of aggression against Iran, which will basically push the entire region back to this vicious circle of chaos and destruction. Will the U.S. administration be receptive to these Israeli urges? I do not believe that the Americans are really interested in basically setting the region on fire. Given the current circumstances, they are very interested in maintaining the peace and the calm in Gaza. They are interested also in not reigniting directly, without exhausting all the diplomatic options, the war against Iran. And even Lebanon, the United States is reportedly for a calibrated escalation against Hezbollah, and not an entire all-out war against Lebanon that will basically wreck the country and put the legitimacy of the new Lebanese leadership, President Aoun and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam's authority and legitimacy into question. So these are all very contentious issues, and we will see whose viewpoint will prevail in Florida. Is it going to be is Bibi Netanyahu going to carry the day, or will President Trump prevail in his urge to, or his desire to maintain some sort of calm in the Middle East? or will they basically barter with one another, and maybe Netanyahu will present some concessions in Gaza in return for the U.S. green lighting an escalation against Hezbollah or Iran? We will see.
Yes. Mr. Helani, now Netanyahu is meeting Trump to discuss Gaza, Iran, and Lebanon. So, from Washington's perspective, what is Trump trying to achieve strategically from this meeting?
Yes, first of all, good morning. Thank you very much for having me, and greetings to your esteemed guest in Cairo and your honorable audience. So, obviously, this meeting comes at a very, very sensitive time. As we know, there has been some concerns from the U.S. administration regarding Israeli behavior, escalatory behavior, if you will, in the Middle East and in a number of live theaters, including, as you mentioned in your report, Iran, Gaza, and of course, Lebanon and Syria as well. So this meeting is seen very much as a recalibration of the relationship between the two leaders, more than an alignment of the two views. As we know, the U.S. and the Trump administration have been heading towards brokering peace efforts in multiple places, whether we are speaking about Gaza or even about Lebanon. And we know that the end of the 12-day war with Iran last summer was very much enforced by the United States. So what we are talking here very much in that meeting, we are thinking about setting the agenda between the two leaders for what's coming next in 2026. Obviously, the hawkishness, as you referred to in your report also about Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has not been met with very much satisfaction by the United States. Speaking about escalating military tensions, of course, between Israel and Hamas. We know, for example, that the killing of one of the Hamas leaders on December 13, Ra'ed Saad, was very much condemned by the United States. And President Trump at the time said that we are looking whether this violated the peace deal in Gaza. We know that also the escalation in Lebanon has been very much met with concerns in the United States that this could derail into an all-out war with some Lebanese factions, of course, mainly Hezbollah. So what Netanyahu is trying to do in the meeting with President Trump in Mar-a-Lago, obviously, is trying to have the president's support to what is coming next. Obviously, the last few months have showed that the U.S. support is not a blanket support to the Israeli government. There has been many conditions about what the Israeli can do next. And we know that President Trump, in many instances, have put rails to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. However, when we are talking about theaters in the Middle East, like Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and even, of course, Iran, these are very much challenging theaters, if you will, because of the huge challenge which the United States sees as Iran influence in the Middle East. One thing I can say for sure is that both President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, they have the same destination, but different timelines. The ultimate goal is to cripple and get rid of Iran's influence in the region, try to contain what is called Iran's threat of developing ballistic missiles. But the timeline is different. In the United States, the view is that this has to be phased process. It has to be through ceasefires, through agreements, and through diplomatic channels. Israel wants to get this done through military force, as we know. So what's going to happen in this meeting is going to determine what is coming next. Is it going to be diplomacy over military force? We have to wait and see.
Yes. Dr. Osman, now Israeli media describe this visit as critical for Netanyahu amid political deadlock over how to implement the second phase of the Gaza deal. So how does this visit reflect the strategic importance that Israel places on securing Washington's support for its policy towards Gaza?
Without U.S. support, Israel's hands are tied. They cannot really indulge in any of their policies or their wet dreams that they are pursuing in the Middle East without the unconditional, unlimited support they get from the United States. So if they wish, for example, to escalate against Iran, they cannot really do that on the ground without the logistical support of the United States and without also the military and economic support of the United States, especially in the situation if there is to be a protracted prolonged
But this
confrontation.
contradicts with Trump's policy of presenting himself as a peacemaker.
Of course, yes.
This is the problem.
So basically now, Trump's policy as a peacemaker, once again, or so he chooses to market himself or portray himself, will stand the test once again. It stood the test for the past year, and he miserably failed on more than one occasion. Most of the wars he ended up being reignited once again. He's attempting to start new wars with a country like Venezuela, for example, and at the same time he is failing to rein in Israel and muzzle its ambitions, its rabid ambitions, actually, because from where we stand, Hala, the United States, we always hear reports and even sometimes hear very polite, delicately, and very carefully prepared statements where the Americans might be disappointed by Israel's behavior. However, do the Americans actually apply any meaningful pressure on the Israelis in order to affect their behavior and modify their policies? Not really. At some critical points they did. The Trump administration, President Trump himself, for example, imposed the Gaza settlement on Netanyahu. He actually forced Netanyahu to accept ending the 12-day war on the 12th day. And we've seen that the Americans do have the capability, and we know that they have the capability to apply pressure on the Israelis and make them do things that they are really not on board with. However, this does not seem to be the case anymore. They are disappointed by how Israel is conducting itself in Gaza. However, they are not really doing anything to basically stop the Israelis and prevent further violations from being committed. But as we are seeing right now, even though the Israelis, and we have heard that President Trump wishes that Israel withdraw to new lines in Gaza or redeploy to new lines in Gaza, what we are seeing is that the yellow line, the so-called yellow line, which is basically the de facto border between Israel-controlled Gaza and the parts of Gaza that are not under Israeli control, is moving westwards. They captured about 5 to 6% more land during the ceasefire. It's a moving ceasefire, it's a moving front line, and it's a one-sided ceasefire. Over 120 Palestinians, mostly civilians, also were murdered during this so-called ceasefire. So basically, the Israelis, the same as and the situation, of course, is the same in Lebanon. So Israel, theoretically, is abiding by the agreements that were brokered by the U.S. administration. But on the other hand, on the ground, they are constantly violating them, and the U.S. is not doing anything. So my final word with this track record, I really do not have enough confidence that the United States and President Trump during this upcoming summit with Netanyahu will actually force him to abide by the agreements that have been reached with regards to Gaza and Lebanon especially.
Yes. Mr. Heleni, now several reports know that Trump wants to prevent a wider regional war. How does this objective shape Washington's discussions with an Israeli leadership that's pushing continued military pressure and escalation, as Dr. Osman mentioned?
Yeah, it's very important to keep in mind that these talks will focus on, of course, delivering to the Israeli side what the U.S. wants to see in the Middle East, which is, of course, economic prosperity and stability in the region. And that cannot happen while, of course, the Israeli side is pushing the region towards war through escalation. But let's remember that when we are talking about these different theaters, which we are discussing at the moment, these are all fluid theaters. So what is agreed in Florida today can actually change over the coming weeks because of any kind of miscalculation by any of the active players in the region. We can think about the Israeli side trying to push the United States towards supporting a military strike, possibly on Iran, or some kind of delay in withdrawal from Gaza, while the United States may object to this. But because of the fluid situation in the Middle East, these calculations can all change. Let's remember something very important, that usually policy and agreements between allies like the United States and Israel, these agreements are usually conducted behind closed doors rather than public statements. Let's remember that when the war on Iran was waged last summer by the Israelis, there has been a US and Iran diplomacy channel working for months in brokered, as we know, mediated by Oman. And at the verge, when the United States felt that this diplomatic channel is not taking us anywhere, there was a green light for the Israelis to start the war. And all the reports, actually, which were leaked afterwards from intelligence institutions or even like the media, they were saying that that war was agreed on by the two leaders, Trump and Netanyahu, throughout all their meetings over the month that, of course, where these negotiations were going ahead. So we understand that this war, the plan for the summer war, the 12-day war on Iran, was not something like a last-minute decision, which Netanyahu convinced President Trump into. The same goes here, I think, in Florida. What we have to rely on and think about is much of what is going behind the closed doors with those two leaders, not the public statements in which the United States keep emphasizing de-escalation. And I have no doubt that President Trump is trying to broker peace in the Middle East. But let's remember also at the same time that President Trump is always chasing what is called peace through strength, which means that a green light to Israel to do any kind of a limited, if you will, military operation here or there can be still seen under President Trump's policy to have peace, because peace can sometimes, and it needs in many instances, as President Trump says, some military power. And
so this is peace from Trump's perspective, which is only concerned with Israel, that has the right to defend itself according to its own claims and pretexts, right?
And yes, and exactly. And in one very quick last statement, let's remember that U.S. policymaking is usually conducted through intelligence reports, for example, assessment from leaders on the ground. And usually the United States, when it formulates its decision regarding anything in the Middle East, of course, and in other theaters, it has to go through the military leaders who are very much close to the situation on the ground. So when there is determination that there is something which requires military power, like, for example, Iran developing its nuclear strength after statements from Iranian officials that the Iranian nuclear power has not been obliterated, as the United States said. This can actually lead to some military interference. So again, the situation on the ground is very fluid, and public statements from both sides, especially the United States, may not inform us on what's coming ahead in the coming weeks. So this is why I said we have to wait and see, and the situation on the ground is very much changing.
Okay. Dr. Osman, Netanyahu is departing amid unresolved political and security challenges. How might this Florida meeting affect Israeli decision-making on Gaza's future role for Palestinian governance in light of what Mr. Helani just raised regarding the behind the closed doors discussions and peace from Trump's perspective?
When we read Israeli statements and even attempt to analyze Israeli actions and policies on the ground with regards to Gaza, it seems that they are very keen on preventing the entry of the second phase of the Gaza agreement, or the Trump initiative for Gaza, or the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, whatever you want to call it, into force, because this would mean that a new technocratic committee or government will take over from Hamas. This technocratic committee has the consent of the U.S. administration, which approved. The Americans and the mediators have approved and vetted all the members of this new governing body that should take over governance in Gaza with the beginning of the implementation of the second phase. And also Hamas concedes to giving up power to this committee. And also at the same time, they will have to redeploy their troops and pull back to new lines inside Gaza. All of these things are things that the Israelis are working vehemently to prevent implementing. They really want to maintain their presence in Gaza. We have seen the statements made by Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, last week, which were very provocative and inflammatory. He said that we will stay in Gaza forever. He even hinted that they might build settlements in northern Gaza in the future, and that they would eventually, of course, destroy Hamas. Again, the same inflammatory rhetoric that basically does not serve to prolong or to maintain the ceasefire and the calm in Gaza, for example. So it seems that the Israelis are trying, of course, to find justifications in order to use them to prevent the implementation of the second phase. And the thing, of course, they keep holding onto the most is the issue of the disarmament of Hamas. They really are using this as a pretext to prevent and obstruct the implementation of the agreement. And they know that time is on their side. While they do this, Hala, the Israelis are undertaking very underhanded covert schemes to basically depopulate Gaza. We have all seen those planes that suddenly show up in South Africa and other countries carrying dozens and sometimes hundreds of Palestinian families, evacuating them out of Gaza. And now with the new agreement that the Israelis have reached with Somaliland, not agreement, this unilateral illegal recognition of Somaliland's sovereignty as a state, even though they are just a breakaway region. It has been reported previously over the last year that Somaliland might be one of those destinations that they might forcefully displace Palestinians into. So if you put all of these pieces of the puzzle together, Hala, you see that the Israelis still have not relinquished their ultimate goal and aim from the war in Gaza, which is the depopulation of Gaza, the eventual gradual depopulation of Gaza, and further expansion into the Palestinian occupied territories, and ultimately, of course, the prevention of any possibility of the establishment of a Palestinian state.
Yes, this is the clear, bigger picture on the ground. Mr. Heleni, Israeli media claims that the visit is critical for Netanyahu's international positioning. So from Washington's perspective, what does the Trump administration expect back from Israel in return for signaling support?
So, as I mentioned earlier in my comments, the U.S. Support to the Israelis have been clearly not like showing that it's not a blanket support. It has to be conditioned through Israeli behavior, aligning with United States policy for de-escalation and peace efforts, which President Trump is trying to broker. When we are thinking about this meeting at the end of 2025, very much President Trump wants to indicate to the American public that his peace efforts in the Middle East have been successful in de-escalating the conflict in the region by the end of 2025. And at the same time, Benjamin Netanyahu wants to get some political win, if you will, before the end of this year, because 2026 is very much critical to his political future. And we know that there are elections coming ahead. And Netanyahu doesn't want to go into these elections while Hamas remains in Gaza. That will be for him very much a defeat. And his unsuccessful efforts to get rid of Hamas after the October 7 attacks, as he promised very much on the day after these attacks. So what we are talking about here, very much for each one of those leaders, President Trump and Netanyahu, there is very much a clear messaging to their public. President Trump wants to show that his peace efforts have been successful, while Benjamin Netanyahu wants to try to get a political win from this visit by saying to the Israeli public that he still has the support of President Trump and he can go ahead with his agenda on demilitarizing Gaza and staying there until that objective is met. So that is where, in my opinion, the critical point remains. And we are thinking here very much of a chicken and egg approach. What comes first? For the US administration, the framework is that we need to get at the end a demilitarized Gaza. There is no Hamas and there is no also Israeli forces. However, the trick here, the sticky point here is that Israel will not withdraw, as they say, from Gaza until Hamas is disarmed. And there is approach which Hamas refuses. This could provide Benjamin Netanyahu in the coming weeks an excuse for any military escalation, which I'm afraid the U.S. could, for some reason, give an understanding that this is happening as a reaction to the fact that Hamas is not disarming. And let's remember that President Trump said earlier that Hamas will have eventually to disarm. If not through peaceful efforts, it has to be done by force. And that is where the challenge remains.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, our time is up, but I'd like to thank my dear guest today, Dr. Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist, joining us from Cairo, and also Mr. Fadi Hillani, Senior Fellow at the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations, joining us from Washington. Thank you, gentlemen, for your valuable insights and discussion. This brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned. My colleague Basant Shhata will be next with the top stories.